Hello and welcome to our March event. So today we have Damien speaking to us about PHP components description files. As always, we'll hang around 8 o'clock for a chat. Our event tonight platform is Big Orange Art, and their aim is to support and promote positive well-being and mental health within remote working communities. We have a Slack channel. Please join us. We're a lovely, friendly bunch. And so, yeah, the link is there. Just join us.
And you can tell from this polished slide that I put together before the thing that we're doing a member survey. So we're looking at things like how events are going to work going forwards, whether people are interested in events back in person in Leeds, whether people will still use the remote option, various things like that, topics, all sorts of stuff. So please log on to that and share your opinions. It really helps us to tailor the event. I'll put the link to this in the meetup chat, the Big Orange Art chat below in a bit. So please do fill that out.
So yeah, Damien is joining us. Hi, Damien, how are you doing?
Hi, how are you? I'm fine. I'm with a happy crowd here, so we're ready to start.
Very excited for your talk.
Same here, same here. I have those are brand new slides, brand new topics, so that's going to be very interesting tonight.
Let's get into it then.
Shall we go? And yes, the slides are on. So thank you very much, everyone. Well, thank you, Erin and Hugh, to host me tonight. It's been quite a while since I haven't done any meeting like that, so I'm very happy to be able to present again and show new content. So this is brand new slides, as I mentioned. And during this next hour, we are trying to extract, I would say, the best of any piece of PHP code, component, if we want, and try to see how we can put them to use for different actions, in particular static analysis. So basically what we're going to cover, first the origin, because everything I'm going to present tonight is based off the current work I'm doing at Exacat, static analysis engine. And then I'm going to describe, maybe not in too many details, but roughly the format that I'm offering at the moment. But the most important, I think, is going to be the application. So see how we are going to be able to not only discover and describe those components, but also put them to use and have various applications far more than just the static analysis that we're doing at the moment. So here we go. I'm Damien Seguy. Maybe it's not my first time in PHP Lead. Well, not physically, but at least on a monthly meetup. I do static analysis for a living. So you may have heard about the Exacat static analysis engine dedicated to PHP. There are other static analysis, but this one has been running for a while. And we do, of course, code reviews and documentation in particular. The topic of tonight is definitely part of the working behind the scenes. I'm also pretty famous for having started this family. So here you have the oldest one, one of the youngest one. Actually, the youngest one is here at the moment. This is a really brand new elephant. But I also have Trisael, which is the oldest one. Well, it's probably sleeping. It's an old elephant of 15-year-old. But I've done that with Vincent Pontier. You can see on the pictures, and if you're interested, you can also. I'll provide the link to get more elephants. Everyone needs elephants all the time at the end of the session, so stay with us. So, origins of PDFF, which is actually a name that you've maybe seen on the first slide, but that is not yet defined. But I'm going to detail that in particular. Initially, and if you think about the way we currently describe any component we integrate from the outside. Well, usually, of course, it goes through Composer. So thank you for Niels and Jordi to work so hard. I think they have a new version either today or coming up. So thanks for their work. But when we need a feature, when we want to use some external dependency, then we just do a require, and we have a name, with a specific format, and then a version. And that's it. Most of the time it works fine, or we have to learn how to use it from the documentation, and then that's it. And that's mostly what we need. Okay, grab the code, make it work, then just forget it until, well, of course, the version change, and there is some extra elements that appears, others that disappears, features that are changing, behaviors that are evolving, things like that. So at that point, actually, we realize that just having a version number is not sufficient. It's good to start, and this is definitely the first step anytime you do a piece of coding, right? You just want to have things that works, and you don't really know or not interested to know how it works. Just make it run, then we want to move on to the next phase. The second phase happens when you have evolutions, or you want to check if the inner workings are actually close to what you expect, or if that fits your business purpose. So at that point, well, we need to be a little more specific and a little more detailed into the code. And the first one who are feeling that need are static analyzers. So I'm doing one that I definitely need those. But I'm pretty sure you use others. I can name PHP Stand, Psalm, Fan, NoVerify. There are lots of them at the moment, and most of them require something else to describe the component. So we use stubs, which the first time I ever heard about them sounds pretty weird. Like, what a stub? It's like a piece of something, like the end of a piece of, I don't know, it's a stub of a tree. So no, stubs are a very strange structure where the code is extracted from the component itself, but it's completely gutted of, I would say, any actual sequence of instructions. Everything that is an instruction is removed, and you keep only the signature. And you have a short example here on the side, on the right. You have the function name, you have the parameters. There may be other details like the default value, but all those structures are there, completely gutted, and they can be reused. So the idea here is that if you want to have static analysis applied to, let's say, a WordPress plugin, you don't want to bring in the WordPress plugin itself, WordPress, code itself. You just need to know if the methods or the functions that are called are actually the good ones, and if the arguments are well. Otherwise, well, then you have a problem. So we don't need how WordPress is interacting, but we need to understand the contract within WordPress, which means just the name of the functions and how they react. This is interesting. So you may run into those websites, repository online. There are PHP Storm stubs. Thank you. They have a really long list of stubs. Fan and PHP Stand Pro both provide some of them. And if you need some more, there are at least 2 stub generators. I have to admit that I also wrote mine, so that might be a third one, but that's a difference. Well, that's less known. And we have those. The advantage here is that instead of importing WordPress and charging everything, then we can have a much faster loading because the stubs are lighter and do not require much processing besides parsing it and reading it. The other detail you may notice when you check those stubs, which even though it's a common piece of concept that's now covering all the different tools, we end up with different specifications. The extra PHP doc and or the extra attributes may not be the same and may not be supported from one tool to the other. We'll see a little bit about that later. So stubs are interesting for providing a good description, not complete, but this is also some kind of an intermediate level of summary. If you sum up a text, you don't bring all the same details, but you still keep most of the interesting parts. Here is the same. The description is pretty interesting. And we also have a lot more options as PHP itself is evolving. Attributes have been added recently, a bunch of finals. So that's pretty rich information. That's pretty good enough. The only trouble is that most of the time you end up with the stubs as multiple files, and it's pretty difficult to follow the different updates and history. So from one version to the other, it might not be easy to keep track of all those stubs and compare them. So basically, this is the origin of the presentation for tonight. And I've obviously run into the same problem, tried to the same solution, but also I realized that we need something that is more convenient to manipulate, and that could also open a number of extra features. So I created the PDFF. Now, as you can see, I'm a developer, so I'm very bad at creating names. So I called it the PHP Document File Format, which is both close to another very famous acronym, and it's also slightly different. But if you come with something better, I'm interested. I'm very happy to include you in this process. In a nutshell, this is the stubs that we were talking about, but in a JSON file format. I mean, the whole section can be actually reduced to that. You also have to understand pretty fast that obviously a piece of code like that is not going to be easily replaced with just a list of elements and piece of code. So this is going to be a JSON with lots of structured data, and that's going to end up being a really big tree. But beside that, it's still going to be an interesting tree, and it's structured, so we can go around the tree. I mean, move in the tree and see what happens. Let's go and dive a little bit into this format. I'm not going to bore you to death with all the details, but I think a few concepts will tell you the most important part. The root of this tree is going to be the version number. So we can now have inside the PDFF, we might have the different versions. Currently, I'm using them separated, but that is open. That is open for later. And then below the version, there are the different namespaces. So you see them here. There is the global one / which is supposed to be constantly there. And then there are all the different namespaces that will be listed after that. And inside each of the namespaces, you will find, again, all the different structures that may end up there. So the simple ones like constants and functions, the more advanced one like classes, trait, interfaces, enums, of course, which end up being some kind of a special class. And I may even consider adding the global variables. Now, globals are not so common those days, but that might be an evolution for later. On the right, you can see a bunch of examples happening. If we go deeper, we already have like 3 levels, and the last level has another 5 branches. If we go below, then again, that's going to repeat itself. The description of a class will first have all the list of the classic options. You can see at the top here, there is abstract, final, the extends, the implements, which is probably out of screen because there are too many of them. And of course, you have another level of structures, which are the properties. We're going to see the methods and the constants. But again, the properties will get their name, and with each of their name, they get their own list of properties. So just, go, it's not deep because it's a tree, so it's supposed to go up, but it actually goes up several levels like that. If we move on, here is a description of a method. And the method will, again, have its name. We get the PHP docs, the attributes, because they are available in the code, so we can add them. They also include a bunch of strange and unexpected ones, total number of parameters and optional parameters. This is calculated on the flight. And we also have return types, which, since we can have multiple of them, then we have an array. But also we have a return type, which tells us what kind of return type is being used. So there are a bunch of them that are not exactly explicitly mentioned in the code, because you don't really think about it when you use a union type as a return type. But it has to be mentioned. When we were talking about properties a little before, for example, the value, the init value, is usually a literal, but it might also be a static expression. So it cannot be, even at static time, it cannot be compiled, it cannot be expressed. So maybe we can collect this expression and then re-execute it later. So there is an extra entry for that. So, but most of the time, those will be classic information you expect from a description of PHP code. This last one are the details at the parameter level. Parameters are actually ordered by their position, which is still currently the most widely used way of calling parameters, positional parameters. But of course, they have a name, so you can also reach them the way you want. Now, I've compiled a bunch of them. I didn't mention that I'm describing a format here, not the tools. There are different tools we're going to discuss, but this is just a format. And I tried to, I applied it to a bunch of frameworks, and basically it ranged from a few kilobytes for the real small component up to mostly 20 megabytes, but I do expect it to be ranging up to 100 megabytes of code. So it might be a little juicy in terms of JSON, but it's also not that big. So it's still manageable and easily usable. And it's not zip also, it's pure text. What can we apply? So after how the format is structured, who can apply that? Well, obviously the composer package is one of them. That's the easy one. It's since the origin. Frameworks in general also are one of them. So experience may vary. There are some frameworks that will break down into much smaller components that are easy to pull in or pull out, depending on the need. But others are like more monolithics, and they will bring the whole framework. So frameworks also happen to be available for like that. And at that point, the file format might be interesting both ways. It might be a description for whoever is using the framework. So you want to know at the next evolution of the framework which of the API have changed. But it also may be interesting from the framework to know and to detect if they have a module system, to detect who is using which API and what kind of function is being used in their system. So it's kind of working both ways at the framework level. Besides PHP code itself, it's also possible to extract information in the same format for, well, I would say PHP itself, the standard edition of the binary, or any extra special extensions that you require using Pickle. It's easy to use reflection and collect this information. And even though, for example, the extension is not available on the system that's running an audit, then you can also check the code and run interesting elements. Of course, there are also all the systems, all the frameworks or applications which are out of Composer. So that's another source of PDFFs. Finally, and since I cannot see you behind my slides, well, that's also the magic of the remote meetings. If you want, you can take a look. There are some examples that are already uploaded. There is the Exacat repository on GitHub. You can take a look at the PDFF repository. And there, there is a bunch of examples. The one you see on the right at the moment is about Concrete 5, which is one of those CMSs, but you will see the classic ones, maybe not yet Laravel, but Symfony is there. There will be WordPress, and you can download them and start toying with them to have a better understanding of what I just explained. Now, we've done a good chunk of it, but I can also sum it up by saying that we turned the stubs into a JSON file, even though it might be a clever one, but of course, what can we do with those? First level, well, obviously this is going to solve the problems you have with static analysis by providing description of dependencies that are related to your code. I'm going to cough a little bit, sorry. That can be present, so it will provide a complete description of the dependencies that you have. So I gave the example of a WordPress plugin and of course the WordPress itself. And that's going to, for example, reduce the number of undefined functions, which obviously are going to be detected by default into by the static analyzer, to 12 of them. So that was that's always interesting to weed out so many obvious false positives. And I was actually very interested there because on the first time I run it, I actually scanned the 600 of them and I thought, okay, it looks good. Just pass the static analyzer and get rid of everything. And then I realized that no, there was one function that was repeated 12 times. So obviously it's not a mistake. And I had to look for a little bit. This looks like a WordPress function, and indeed it's another plugin. So this plugin has dependency on another one. And that's actually one of the side effects of these description files, which is that I could actually just add an extra dependency, another PDFF in the static analyzer, and then end up with a complete check that all the functions have been actually defined in the code. So that looked good, and that was interesting as a secondary information to pick up from the code. Of course, here this is an example with functions. It's a little easier to explain than go with full-fledged functions and type-ins, classes and type-ins. But we can use exactly the same information that we had inside the stubs as basis for knowledge, as knowledge base, I would say, and run them with other analysis. That could be number of arguments, checking the argument names, which is definitely one of the most juicy errors that we actually have at the moment. If you use inheritance and you change names of parameters between methods in the parent class and the child class, you're going to run into some quirks at the PHP levels because the name are not going to fit what people are going to use when they try to use the name argument calling your functions, your methods. So method names are available. We could check variance, covariance, or any extra options that appears on parameters, on types, and things like that. But that's just an extension of what you have now. Now we can start things that are a little bit different and a little bit out of the box. Now that we have a JSON file and actually we can have all the versions available, it's a lot easier to do comparisons. The data is well structured. We start from the versions, then we can go into the namespaces. From the namespaces, we can compare just the list of available namespaces. Just grab the two sets of namespaces from different versions, and you compare what is added, what has been removed, and whatever is whatever is common inside, whatever is common to both sets, then this means that you can go on and go deeper to check something else. So if we start with the namespaces, everything that is in every namespace that is in both versions, then you can go below and say, okay, all the list of functions inside this namespace also available in both of them. There will be some that will be added, some that will be removed. And among the functions that are common to both namespaces and version, then we can go deeper and check if the parameters are there. And then, well, we're going to stop at parameters because there are not too many of properties that we could check. But this is the idea. And here on the right, you have a little tool that I created that allows me to check pretty fast what are the differences between versions of the same component. Now, probably people are always, very specific and trying to use the same, semantic version behavior, where you have to do a number of you cannot evolve too much from one version to the other if it's a minor, but you can break a little bit if it's on a middle, and it can break big if it's in the major version. But there we have a tool that allows us to compare them pretty fast and list immediately the discrepancies between the two versions. We could also think that big frameworks usually bring you a migration documentation, so you know how or what will be the major impacts in your code between at the moment where you do the migration. But on the other hand, maybe in companies or in places where the audience is not as large, it's not that easy to have a list of evolutions. And even part of those evolutions are not advertised, and they will be discovered later, like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, this method has been changed and the behavior has changed. So here, comparing to JSON, pretty simple, and we can actually get some interesting documentation in a completely automated way. And we can even go further than just versions like that. Here, actually, I'm just showing you a comparison I did of WordPress between version 4.7 and 5.8. So it ranged a pretty large number of versions for WordPress. But WordPress is very famous to be able to be backward compatible. And they are very fanatic about being backward compatible. And basically, out of a little more than 4,000 different functions, 3,000 of them are exactly available from version 4 to version 5. And I only found 3 functions that disappeared, including one, which is JSON encode, which kind of makes sense because probably, I don't know, the version 4.8 would still support a polyfill, a replacement that could work even if you don't have the right version of PHP, but nowadays it's kind of abandoned. I'm just wondering why I don't see also JSON decode, but either it's a bug or it's something else I've spotted. But then again, we have the list of the 600 different new functions that were added. Now, this is a pretty extreme example, and this comparison element is interesting, but we could actually do that a little better because if you remember when we're using, for example, Git, and we move or rename a file, it actually acts as one deletion. Well, one on stage and one new stage. It's a add and remove until the recent version where Git now is able to detect that we moved the file and it say, oh yeah, it was renamed, but it's not obvious. So here we could compare and identify what was added and what removed. But what would happen if we wanted to rename something? If we want to have the PDFF, for example, describe that, we need to add an extra information. A piece of information that would actually not be interested to PHP itself for execution because, well, obviously PHP is not interested in knowing what has changed. It just wants the code, parse it, run it, and then here we go. But that would be an interesting piece of information, an option we can leave in the code that will help us understand how how the code is evolving and maybe even apply some automatic updates. There are nowadays tools. Rector is one of them. Exacat is another one. We can do changes directly based on the information that are there. So why not move that way? And the next, and that actually leads us to consider how much options we already have into PHP. So not even before, adding a new option to explain which functions or which methods are being renamed, we have to consider that the code in PHP is supporting more and more options that are dedicated to help us as developer code better, but does not really have an impact on execution. PHP is really into, I need to execute that as fast as possible. I start with nothing. I have to grab everything, parse it, execute it, parse again, because at some point I need to do an extra include. And is not interested in all of them. Though some of those are, for example, attributes and PHP docs, which definitely will carry a lot of information for us, but not much for PHP. Most of the keywords, that would include types, that would include, things are abstract. Interfaces is another example. And I would say the best example I have here is assert. Assert is an assertion. So you use it as an extra way to detect weird situation inside the code. But once you go to production, you do not want the asserts anymore. It kind of leads to certain side effect because, well, if you want in development the code to stop on an assert, then in production you probably want the same. But let's say we could replace them all by exceptions. But at that point, assert is really just something that you want to use in dev and that you can get rid completely of when you go to execution. The impact of this function and those options as assert is actually leaking through different steps of PHP execution. Obviously, the options start inside the code because that's where we write them. Well, of course, PHP needs to understand what we want to do, so it has to be written there. It will most probably be useful to the intermediate level, the one that parse the code into tokens and check if the code is actually available. And some of them, just because PHP is lazy, or shall I say, because it's actually a lot easier to do during execution, then a few of them will go to execution. But we're not always interested in having those in execution, and we could get rid of them. So this means that compared to the current way of doing things, a part of the options will be still available during execution. Interfaces may leak, but they may also be available to something else. And there's something else that we'll have is, of course, static analysis tools. Most of those options are very good for static analysis tool to grab them, understand what we want to do with the code, and apply specific rules. And you have to consider that between the code that we write, which actually is not code by itself, it's just text, and execution, well, there's the tokenizer, but it's just a very specific use of the code. Static analysis here is kind of a different branch that does not lead to the same place, but also it leads to different results. And the constraints between execution and static analysis are not the same. PHP as a tool for executing needs to be fast, memory efficient, connect to databases, use data. PHP has access to the data when it runs the code. When we're in static analysis, we don't have the data. We don't have the data yet. We can guess some of it, but we cannot have it. On the other hand, we also have a lot more memory and we have a lot more time to execute things. The end result is not going to be, of course, the web page that we're creating or the web service, but it's going to be just a report saying, hey, look, there might be a problem here. You should take a look at that. So where am I going with that? Okay, it's a little bit far. So let's take a look at what we have at the moment. Let's say well, hopefully you have already moved to PHP 8.1, but let's say some of you are a little late and they are still in PHP 8.0. Except that you really would like to start using PHP 8.1 read-only properties. So it's a new property that it's new feature in PHP 8.1 that allows you to mark a property. I don't like read-only, to be honest, as a keyword. I would say write once, but let's keep it on read-only. You want to know that this property is only written once, and it's almost going to act as a constant, except that this is a constant for which you don't have the value initially. So it has to be a property, so you can, I don't know, fetch this information from the database, and then that's it. Once it's changed, once it's set, it doesn't change. Now, if you remember from the PDFF and the JSON that I have there, obviously we're supporting PHP 8.1, so there is a slot available for marking a property as read-only. It would be useless in PHP 8 to apply this because obviously PHP 8 does not recognize read-only, and it will be unhappy. On the other hand, we could feed that information directly to, let's say, PHP Stan or Exacat, and realize that, yes, we can check inside the code if the property is actually a read-only property. Of course, the PHP 8 is not going to run with read-only because it's not there, but if it's checked to be a read-only and it does not only rely on the discipline you have in the code to have a read-only property, then basically we are bringing back PHP 8.1 feature and having it run on PHP 8.0, because if you do not change the property once it has been set, well, you have a read-only, except it doesn't have the tag next to it. So that means some of the features that PHP is going to offer in a few months, or maybe as soon as your DevOps has decided to update to PHP 8.1, those features can be backported to PHP because they can be described inside the external file, and then they can be used as static analysis because those will take advantage of new features a lot faster. Let me give you another example here. In the upcoming PHP 8.2, there is a new option. It's not even set in the documentation because it's an RFC at the moment. I didn't check recently if it was set for voting, but at least it's in discussion at the moment to have a sealed keyword. So the sealed keyword allows you to restrict the usage of a specific interface to a number of functions, or here those are classes. So you can take a look. It's a little bit cropped here, but you can see sealed interface, and it's permitted to, and there's a bunch of classes behind that tells you, okay, who is available, who is allowed to use this class. I would think about it as the first element we need to create a component system, something where we can decide that some of the classes are some kind of a public class. They can be instantiated by external dependent, not dependencies, dependent. But also there will be another bunch of classes, interfaces, that should actually stay within the component and that are not interesting to anyone else. And you will not have this side effect that within 2 or 3 versions of your own component, you realize that people don't use the class you like, but they use some other class, and you cannot, make that class evolve anymore because there are too many people depending on it. So here we have an example of PHP features that is not available yet. That might be. Good luck to Patrick to make it pass. But also, if you are interested in those, then you'll have to wait for quite a moment. We have to wait until November to get the new PHP version. Then you need to wait for people to adopt it. And then, of course, all the history backlog of evolving PHP to newer version. And that's it. On the other hand, if we already prepare a slot inside the PDFF to hold, as of now, the sealed feature, then we can already start applying those checks and use static analysis to review the code and say, hey, look, this interface is supposed to be limited to these classes, and I see that you're using it somewhere else. please change it. Initially, it won't affect your PHP 8.1 code, but it might actually be interesting to have the feedback on it and know that at some point you'll have to upgrade until the keyword itself is available. So it means that on top of the stubs and the way we actually describe them, we could actually be going far beyond what PHP currently offers. I can imagine that deprecated or the through keywords that people are trying to bring from Java that tells you that the method is capable of throwing that kind of exceptions, just as a documentation. That could be an interesting option we have. We could mark classes as service controller, entity, formatter, whatever we use from conception. And that will, again, trigger different behavior from the static analysis to check the code in the correct way and not just rely on trying to guess if, oh, look, this is a class ending with controller, that must be a controller. We could have technical elements, if you like design pattern, those could be mentioned inside an attribute. And I actually realized recently that we've been kind of waiting for generics for quite a while. And also those generics apparently are not going to come to PHP soon, just due to the sheer complexity of adapting them for the current code base. So we might probably not see them appear inside PHP, but one of the solutions available for generics is called type erasure, which means that, for example, when we do the same kind of generics in TypeScript of Java, those types are actually checked initially at the time they do compilation, because there is then the good moment and they have time to do extra checks. And once the generics have been tested and they have been proved to be positive inside the code, then the system actually drop them and do not check any type during execution, which would be exactly the situation we are here, with a place for description for the generics and another one that would be inside the code that just runs as usual, but has been checked by another external system. Which means also that we don't have any perturbation of any current code you have. You can apply and describe some external feature that should be available in the code and apply them as a separate process. And if it's still blocking, at that point, you can just unplug it for a while and then run it as PHP and older versions. That would basically look like that. You have on the right a kind of extension of the PDFF, which has a presentation, a class, which has a deprecated and different through and sealed information. And instead of polluting your code with a number of even extra options, well, you just can leave it there and keep your code very, very clean. We end up with what I call provable code. Those are options we were mentioning, not the one that are going to be completely new, but the one we already have. Most of the time, they run inside one consistent theoretical frame. Let's take, for example, visibility. Visibility, you can mark properties, methods, constants as private, public, protected. But basically, this is an extra check type execution. So we could imagine that all those visibility are now defined somewhere in the external file. They are checked. Is it possible to check any kind of PHP code? Probably not. Dynamic properties comes to mind, for example, as something that will make our life very miserable to check that. So we might not be able, for example, to say, if you want to prove that your code has the right visibility, you cannot use dynamic properties or dynamic method for that matter. You should also avoid using class invasion. If this is exactly the example on the right, class invasion is when you use a file, you can access private properties or methods on an object as long as you're also executing it inside the same class. So here the A variable, even though it's private, we can change the value inside the class, but not outside. So that's just that's a feature from PHP. So we have to drop, to prove the code, we probably have to drop a number of features which would make the analysis too complicated, or will require later more research and development to be able to handle with a little bit more, precision and success. Those extra features would probably also need some kind of common standard denomination. So I don't know if service or deprecated means the same when you are in PHP or in WordPress or in Laravel, but that would probably need some common, body that will help us have standard denomination. And then, of course, within the static analysis tools, to know how to interpret them depending on the context. And finally, we already mentioned how to transpile, to add and remove the option from the code. We probably need some extra tools to be able to add or to remove them automatically, because basically the PDFF is all the options moved into an external file, but that works both ways. We could actually go back and forth between the code and between the external tool. Finally, you may have questions. Why do we need an extra system to handle options? At the moment, we have basically two of them. The first one is the PHP keyword, in which I would consider, for example, that the sealed keyword that the upcoming one would fall. This one is important. It's the classic one because, of course, this is PHP standard. So, well, we can't go around it. It also means that those keywords will have some special behavior at execution time. So it's pretty safer, but it's also a much slower process because we have to wait for the RFC, then the PHP version, then the deployment, and then the migration of our own code over there. Of course, we could do that with attributes and PHP docs. Most of what we mention here actually attributes and PHP docs are options. So this is nice. This could be compensated faster than PHP keyword by using PHP custom code, which probably means it's a lot slower at execution. And even if we don't use those options, then just the extra parsing at execution time is going to make the code slightly slower. It's probably not right for a PHP doc, but attributes are now just expressions like others where you can even include new. So that requires an extra second. The external file, well, here the PDFF, would be completely transparent because we have in one place the code, which actually can be as simple as anything. So if you want to get rid of visibility and most of them, just remove them. They are somewhere outside where you can fine-tune them. The inconvenience is, of course, that might be transparent and happen like magic if someone just realized that the static analyzer is unhappy for some reason it doesn't see in the code. But it's also completely removed from the code, so it has no cost at execution time, and it is highly customizable. I'm going to conclude this presentation out of extremely abstract concept like that with a bunch of open questions. My part, I would say, and my journey started, of course, from being able to replace stubs into something else. Along the way, I've seen a number of extra tools. So the little tool to compare versions, the fact that we can cache and generate those PDFFs and have them stored as a file, so that a little bit like Composer, we just download interesting files and not regenerate them all the time. Those are interesting elements, but they still need some work. So this is an open question. If you're interested, I want those. There are also a work of standardization of the names of the properties that would be there, and also tools to apply and remove the options from within the code. How can we go back and forth between the external file and inside the code without too much fuss? But I still think it's a pretty interesting journey that I'm starting there, and it could actually open the door to many updates or improvements that we've been waiting for a long time in PHP, and that as a community we can start working on right now. So thank you very much. Very happy to have this presentation, and I hope it's going to steer a little bit the way you see PHP code and how you want also to have it handled and groomed before production, and that will help you for code quality. Thank you very much. Finishing here, there is the link at the bottom with elephants if you are very interested to bring elephants in your life. Always need elephants.
Well, thanks for that, Damien. That was very interesting.
That was great.
If anyone has any questions, please stick them in the chat. We haven't had any just yet. We'll see if anyone puts anything in. In the meantime, how would people get involved with this if they wanted to start using it? And how would you recommend people help with it?
So the first step is, I would say, taking a look at the different files that I've offered on the GitHub repository, because I would say that's going to be the one too many. That would be the best. There are already a bunch of PDFFs available there. If you want your own specific framework, you can always talk to me, and then you can start toying with that and see if it's interesting or if I've missed a bunch of things. Then I'm currently working on specifications, so I want to detail everything that is available there, again, for allowing the creation of tools based on this format. I think the most important will be how people take advantage of those data sets more than the format itself. They can always join me on Twitter in particular. I think that will be more reactive there. And I'm available more or less on different channels. I think I have a Discord and a Slack.
Cool. Yep. So if anyone wants to help with and reach out via those mediums. We haven't had any other questions yet. So I think, have you got any questions, Irene, that you'd like to ask?
I think I'm good. It was a really, really good talk, and it's great that we record them. So if anyone has anything that they need to review, anything that they want to look in more details, you can always go back and look at it again, which I probably will do. But it was a really, really good talk.
Yeah, great. Okay, I think that's we'll call it there then. Thank you for that talk, Damien. It's really interesting. Good to hear about some new stuff that's going on.
You're welcome.
And we'll see you all next time.
See you in April, everyone.